Bob Russell tells a story of an enthusiastic Christian telling him how his walk with the Lord has been a continuous series of victories. Before I gave my life to Christ, I had a terrible habit of swearing, this man boasted. But once I became a Christian, I was never tempted to use profanity again. Before coming to the Lord, I had a lustful eye. It was embarrassing the way I looked at women. But Jesus transformed me, and now I find no woman attractive but my wife. With my past forgiven, my future assured, and my present empowered by the Holy Spirit, I don't have a problem in the world. Mr. Russell wrote that he wanted to ask the man, "How long have you had this problem with lying?" Now, maybe this man's conversion had eliminated temptation. And perhaps he never experienced failure in his Christian life. God doesn't deal with us all the same. But his experience is not my experience. Is it yours? I frequently have to battle temptation. I often feel myself struggling with sin. There are times when I find the world attractive and Satan's offers appealing. And there are times that I fall. I sin, and I feel horrible about it. When we begin to think that we're pretty good people, Romans chapter 7 becomes a reality check. In these 25 verses, Paul reminds us that all of us struggle with sin. Too often, we try to spruce up our salvation by claiming perfection or victory after we do the baptistry. But the truth is, we still struggle with sin. Now, it's more acceptable to say things like, "I'm okay and you're okay." We would rather deceive ourselves into thinking that we are not really all that bad. But for us to understand the grace of God, we must first understand how sinful we really are. If I'm okay and you're okay, then there'd be no need for baptism, and there'd be no need for Jesus to die on the cross. If we're not so bad, then Jesus did not need to die on the cross, but the truth is, we all struggle with sin. We all struggle with sin, and we forget God's deliverance. God's deliverance. Famous Bible commentator William Barclay wrote about the first 6 verses of Romans chapter 7 this way. He said, "Seldom did Paul write so difficult and so complicated a passage as this." C.H. Dodd, another noted theologian, added that when we study these verses, we should try to forget what Paul says and find out what he means. Now, that may sound like mumbo jumbo, but the advice may be good. You see, the first 6 verses of Romans chapter 7 remind us of how God has delivered us from our sin. It's the illustration Paul uses that often throws us off. So follow along as I read Romans chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. Romans chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. "Do you not know, brothers, for I am speaking to men who know the law, that the law has authority over a man only as long as he lives? For example, by law, a married woman is bound to her husband as long as he is alive. But if her husband dies, she is released from the law of marriage. So then, if she marries another man while her husband is still alive, she is called an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she is released from that law and is not an adulteress, even though she married another man. So, my brothers, you also died to the law from the body of Christ, that you might belong to another, to him who was raised from the dead, in order that we might bear fruit to God. For when we were controlled by the sinful nature, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in our bodies, so that we bore fruit for death. But now, by dying to what once bound us, we have been released from the law, so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit, and not in the old way of the written code." Now, you see what Paul writes here raises more questions than it answers. Questions like, isn't the husband also bound to his wife? Doesn't the man who remarries commit adultery as well? Is there ever a reason for divorce? Can divorced people ever remarry? I think the answer to all those questions is yes, we could easily get bogged down here with the discussion about marriage, when that's not the point Paul's trying to make. The simple point Paul is trying to make is death cancels all contracts. That's why in the traditional wedding ceremony, the couple repeat vows that include the clause that will end the contract of marriage, till death do us part. Death cancels any and every contract or legal agreement we have, at least in theory, although I guess some creditors may try to get their money from the deceased's family, but that's a whole different problem. Generally, though, when we die, we cannot continue to make house payments. We cannot complete a jail sentence. We cannot finish a job. That's why on most monetary debts today, the creditor will include a death insurance policy, so he will receive his money if you die before you pay him off. When we are baptized, we die, and our contract or our marriage to sin is canceled. Coming up out of the water, we are free in a spiritual sense to marry again. At the same time, baptism makes us dead to sin. It also brings us up now married or under contract to Christ. Does that mean we won't ever sin again? No. Does that mean temptation will go away? Hardly. In fact, it may become stronger than ever. But our baptism does mean that God has delivered us from sin. And if He has delivered us from sin, why would we want to go back to it again? When I was young, I used to ride my bike all the time. However, I did not ride my bike for exercise. I rode it as a means of transportation. I would ride my bike to the store to buy a candy bar. I would ride my bike to the lake to go swimming. I would ride my bike to go see my friends. A funny thing happened after I turned 16. My bike that I had ridden so many miles on and used so often began to gather dust in the corner of the garage. You see, at 16, I got my driver's license, and now that I can drive a car, I no longer needed, or for that matter, wanted, my old means of transportation. After we are baptized, we no longer need our old way of life. God has delivered us from sin. I wish I could stop the sermon right now. And many would. They'd say, God has delivered us from sin, and we no longer need to worry or want to sin. But if I stopped right here, if you're honest with yourself, you will leave feeling very inadequate, very unworthy, because we know that we still struggle with and often fall to temptation, and we sin every day. We have been delivered from sin, but there's a problem that we all know about and all understand, and that is sin still has a grip on us, and it still deceives us. You see, we struggle with sin because of sin's deception. About 20 years ago, I would get these terrible stomach aches. Sometimes I would literally be doubled over in pain. But one day it got so bad I had one of the kids call 911 because I couldn't stand up and I was sweating and I really felt like I wasn't going to make it. However, by the time the ambulance arrived, I was feeling much better. I could stand up and I was no longer sweating, so I told the ambulance I did not need them. However, I did drive myself over to the ER where they ran some tests, gave me some medicine, and sent me home, telling me to see my family doctor within the next few days. My family doctor knew the right questions to ask. And he discovered something. He discovered I've been drinking 5 cans of Dr. Pepper a day. One at each meal, one for an afternoon snack, and one before I went to bed. He told the salt drink was hurting my stomach. And unless I wanted to be in pain all the time, to stop. Well, that was easy enough. I switched to Pepsi. Well, I also cut down on the amount I did drink. And now, one can a day is more than enough for me now, so that's a good thing. But to this day, Dr. Pepper still tempts me. Whenever I see the commercials or see the display at the store, I remember how good it tastes. For years, I would only have 1 Dr. Pepper a year. I'd have 1 small cup that I would purchase during the week church camp, and that'd be enough. I could enjoy the taste and not hurt my stomach. Now, I can drink it a lot more. And I try to stay away from it, even though it's the best soda ever. You see, Dr. Pepper was bad for me because I abused it. By itself, the drink is a refreshing treat, but not something to be enjoyed at every meal or the only source of liquid. The same thing can be said about the law and how sin has deceived us. Romans chapter 7, beginning of verse 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? Certainly not. Indeed, I would not have known what sin was except through the law. For I would not have known what it was to covet if the law had not said, do not covet. But sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, produced in me every kind of covetous desire. For apart from law, sin is dead. Once I was alive apart from law, but when the commandment came, sin sprang to life, and I died. I found that the very commandment that was intended to bring life actually brought death. For sin, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So then the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. Did that which is good then become death to me? By no means. But in order that sin might be recognized as sin, it produced death in me through what was good, so that through the commandment, sin might become utterly sinful. It's not God's law that's bad. The law teaches us right from wrong. However, sin seizes the opportunity of the law and tempts us to want to sin. It's what we might call the old forbidden fruit syndrome. If we can't have it, we want it. If, for example, someone said that fried chicken is bad for you, there'd be nothing I'd want more than fried chicken. Maybe with a big helping of mashed potatoes and gravy, some sweet corn drenched in butter, and to wash it down, a tall, cold glass of Dr. Pepper. I'm getting hungry. How about you? A few minutes we'll have our dinner, so we'll be all right. Someone has said that sin deceives in three ways. First, we are deceived regarding the satisfaction to be found in sin. If the grass did not look greener on the other side, we would not be tempted to go there. Second, we are deceived by the excuses sin makes. Everyone is doing it, we argue, as if somehow that justified an immoral or sinful behavior. By the way, this morning we were talking about the first sin in the garden, and Eve's excuse was that Adam's excuse was everyone was doing it. Well, that's true. Adam and Eve did it. That's everybody. So everybody was doing it. That's the only time in history that actual excuse was accurate, because everyone was doing it. Other than that, it's not true. But like our parents used to say, if all your friends jumped off a cliff, would you? Third, we are deceived into thinking we can escape the consequences of sin. Remember what the serpent told Eve when he was tempting her to eat the forbidden fruit? He said, "You will surely not die." He convinced Eve that God would not be that harsh if they were caught. And after all, Adam and Eve were the only two people in the garden, and if they died, there'd be no one else. A person does not rob a bank thinking he'll be caught. Remember what Paul wrote in Galatians: do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. William Barclay wrote, the awfulness of sin is shown by the fact that it could take a fine and splendid and lovely thing and make it a weapon of sin. That is what sin does. Sin can take the beauty of love between men and women and turn it into lust. Sin can take the honorable desire for independence and financial security and turn it into uncontrollable greed for money and power. Sin can take the loveliness of friendship and use it as a seduction to do the wrong things. That is what has been called the infinite damnability of sin. Sin can take the very best things and defile them with a polluting touch. Sin deceives us biggest deception of all is thinking that we, by ourselves, can overcome sin. You see, God's deliverance from sin and sin's deception in our lives should lead us to our deficiency. Verses 14 through 25 of Romans chapter 7. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do, and if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature, for I have the desire to do what's good, but I cannot carry it out. For what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. When I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in the members of my body, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within my members. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from the body of death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in a sinful nature a slave to the law of sin. We can see from these verses I just read that we are deficit in at least three ways. We're deficit in knowledge. If to know the right thing to do was to do the right thing, life would be easy. For instance, I know how to bowl. I know how to hold the ball. I know how to approach the pins. I know where the ball should go to get a strike, and I know how to pick up spares. I know how to keep score in bowling, and I know how to figure out an average. But none of those things make me a great bowler. It's so frustrating to throw the ball down the alley, knowing where it should go and what it should do, only to have the ball go in a different direction and pins remain standing. Everyone who bowls, though, from the professional to the first timer, always falls short of perfection in bowling. No one gets strikes all the time. Now, the professional can score a perfect score of 300 many times in their career, sometimes a couple times in a row, but not every time. Not every time. Not every time can they roll 12 strikes in a row. In the last league I bowled with, it seemed like someone got a 300 every single week. But not me. I was excited if I wrote 200. In the same way, we may know the difference between right and wrong, but that does not mean we will always do what is right. We have enough knowledge to know we sin, but not enough to know how to stop sinning. Second, these verses show that we are weak in resolution. There's a big difference between planning to do what is good and actually doing it. About 10 years ago, I read the saddest obituary. It was for an older man who had died, and it listed all the normal things you would find in an obituary. The article told us how old he was, where he was from, where he died, who his wife and children were, and how many grandchildren he had. The obituary told us where he worked and the clubs he belonged to, but it said something at the end that really disturbed me. The last line of the obituary said, he always wanted to write a novel. Now normally, something we did not do would not be included in the obituary. I'm not sure why the family wanted that included. However, I know it kick-started my dreams of writing, and I sat down and finished the book I was writing. But all of us have things in our lives that we really want to do, but never get around to doing them. Our resolutions often fall short. It may be something as simple as getting the yard mowed, or as serious as overcoming a serious habit. We all know the good we should do. We don't always do them. And then what happens? We feel guilty, don't we? We feel like a failure. We are deficit in our resolutions. Finally, we are weak in treating the problem. Paul said in the verses we read, he knew what was wrong, but he kept falling back to sin. No matter what he tried to do, he was unable to overcome his sinful nature. If such a great and powerful leader like Paul had a problem with sin, why do we pretend that we can overcome it? What do? We put on our Christian face, we dress up in appropriate clothes, and we say all the right things. But none of that will erase the sin that has trapped us today. Sin is a festering cancer, simmering in our souls, threatening to blow up and destroy us. That's why Paul cried out in verse 24, "What a wretched man I am! Who will rescue me from this body of death?" And with that question, Paul brings us back around again full circle. Sin has deceived us. We are deficient. But God has delivered us.